The University is pleased to present these lectures as part of our community engagement and as a way of stimulating our education and research in national security matters. In particular, this lecture series is designed to explore the changing nature of defence and security and how Australia pursues its national interests both domestically and in a changing global environment. It's my pleasure today to welcome Mr. Andrew Metcalfe, AO, the Secretary of the Department of Immigration and Citizenship. Andrew, we're very appreciative that you're here to give this, our third year of lectures, such a good kickstart. The Department of Immigration and Citizenship makes a major contribution to Australia's security and well-being. It serves vital and uplifting work in looking after our migration programme and promoting the value of Australian citizenship. In recent years, it's also been required to respond to the challenge of irregular maritime arrivals and the task of providing and managing immigration detention centres. On the international level, the Department has worked closely with the Bali process to address shared regional and global issues of people smuggling and population displacement. In discharging its duties, the Department collaborates closely with other government agencies, the private sector, community organisations and individuals. Along with other Commonwealth departments and agencies, the Department of Immigration and Citizenship has recently become a frontline player as a member of Australia's national security community. Andrew Metcalfe has been with the Department during turbulent and demanding times as it's assumed new responsibilities and been presented with a wide variety of challenges. He's been Secretary of the Department since July 2005. He has many diverse and demanding responsibilities, including managing about 8,000 staff located in every state and territory in Australia and in more than 60 cities overseas. His departmental operating budget for 2011 to 12 is over $2 billion Australian dollars. He's well qualified to perform these weighty duties. He's been a Deputy Secretary, a First Assistant Secretary and a Chief of Staff to a previous Minister for Immigration. In January this year, he was awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia, an AO, for distinguished service to public sector leadership through contributions to Australia's international relations and to major public policy development and programme implementation in the areas of immigration, Australian citizenship, cultural diversity and national security, and to the community. Andrew, in the hope that I've left something for you still to say, I'm delighted to welcome you to the University and I invite you to address the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and can I thank you for the warm welcome, and can I, as a fairly regular visitor to the University, compliment you on the transformation that's taking place of the University of Canberra. It is great as a major department here in Canberra to have a close association with the University, and we look forward to that strengthening in years to come. Can I also acknowledge General Peter Leahy, Professor Peter Leahy, an old colleague of mine, and thank you for the invitation to speak here today. And folks, also, with your indulgence, can I also note that we have Chris Peters here today, Canberra's Citizen of the Year. It's great to see you, Chris, and congratulations on the very well-deserved honour that's been bestowed upon you. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, can I very sincerely acknowledge the first owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And if there are any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today, can I wish them all our very best. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here with you today and to talk about how my department, Immigration and Citizenship, contributes to Australia's national security, both at the domestic and international level, through the diverse range of policies and programs that we deliver, including social cohesion, border management, offshore biometrics, regional cooperation, international capacity building, and our Immigration Integrity Officer network. The Department of Immigration and Citizenship is now well into its middle age. We're 67 years old and we continue to play, however, an important role in developing the cultural, social and economic life of our nation, and through that contributing to our national security. Since 1945, Australian society has been enriched by the permanent settlement of over 7 million people from around the world. As a result, we now live in one of the world's most linguistically, culturally and religiously diverse nations. Indeed, around 1 in 4 Australians were born overseas, and around 1 in 2 of us were either born overseas or had a parent born overseas. And I always like to judge the audience to whom I'm speaking, so I might ask you, if you were born overseas, to raise your hand. Well, that looks like a pretty good quarter. So keep your hand up if you were born overseas, and if you have one of or both of your parents born overseas, please join them and raise your hand. So, well, that is a pretty representative group. So congratulations on being a small representative sample of Australia as we know it. While the core of our work has remained constant over that 67-year history, there have also been some dramatic changes, of course, in the global setting. These have required quick adaptations and sometimes slower adaptations to the way we operate. For example, obviously 67 years ago, international travel was a fairly leisurely activity largely undertaken by sea. Today, international travel by air and by sea has become a way of life for many people. Travel for tourism, work or for study, to begin a new life, and sometimes also for the purpose of committing crimes or acts of violence. In the 2010-11 financial year, over 30 million people moved across the Australian border, about 15 million in, 15 million out. That compares with 28 million in the previous year. In other words, every second someone will cross the Australian border, and it's up to departments and agencies like ours to manage that in an effective and safe way. We believe that by 2020, only 8 years away, the indications are now that our number of border crossings is likely to increase to about 40 million movements in that particular year. As the movement of people across borders has increased, so has the impetus to identify those who travel with the intent of damaging Australia's national interests before they reach our shores. My department's always required stringent health and character checks for people wishing to come to Australia if they're not Australian citizens. Over time, we've increasingly consulted with members of the security community and began to move towards greater information sharing. Events of the last decade, or the last 11 years in particular, including the attempted bombing of Northwest Airlines on Christmas Day 2009, clearly demonstrated the need to move even more quickly to share greater information in our systems with other agencies. The lessons learned from the attempted bombing of Northwest Airlines served as a fairly recent but dramatic example of the need to dismantle information silos, in turn facilitating greater intelligence sharing between all agencies and between countries. The challenge my department faces is to how to effectively combine our responsibility as a nation builder, which is vital to our economic and social prosperity, with the need to prevent the entry of those likely to threaten the national interest. In my view, those are not opposing objectives, they are symbiotic, they actually move together. Within our overall operational settings, Australia, of course, is a signatory to a range of conventions such as the Chicago Convention of 1994 relating to air travel and a number of international human rights conventions, most notably the Refugee Convention, but also the Convention Against Torture, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and so on. These international conventions, of course, place obligations on us as to how we deliver our policies and how laws are framed. This puts the onus on government departments and agencies to cleverly develop policies which address both issues without permitting one way of thinking to triumph over the other. So, moving to talk a little bit about our contribution to national security through social inclusion policies. Part of the national security agenda is to ensure that we build a resilient and socially inclusive society where everyone feels a sense of belonging and has the opportunity to fully participate. Social inclusion is at the core of many of our programs. Our immigration, citizenship, settlement and cultural diversity policies and programs help strengthen social cohesion and have supported and will support the successful integration of migrant communities by facilitating equitable economic and social participation. Experience indicates that programs and policies which assist migrants to engage with their local community can help them to participate and settle more effectively. Marginalisation and isolation undermine opportunities for many people in Australia, and can deprive Australia of the full potential of their contributions to our shared future. More significantly, in extreme forms, this can lead to serious social consequences such as violent conflict or growing support for extremist ideologies. Countering violent extremism is thus a key component of the government's counter-terrorism strategy. This important work aims to ensure that those in our society most at risk of turning to extremist views are offered alternative pathways. There's clear evidence in both Australia and overseas that those most at risk of extremism are often young and sensitive to perceptions of their social and economic circumstances. However, it's important to note that there's no single pathway to extremism. A combination of different factors can all contribute. To minimise the risk of extremism, we work with our colleagues from other department agencies to provide support to communities, to strengthen their resilience and to provide opportunities for social participation. Programs aimed at social cohesion help bridge the gap between national security priorities and community harmony. In my view, Harmony Day, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time, is a particularly important way of ensuring that Australians recognise and celebrate the extraordinary diversity that now exists within our society, but the many benefits that we have from that diversity. By working to ensure that everyone in Australia can participate effectively in society, access government services and receive government support where necessary, the government reduces the risks of movements towards violent extremism. This leads me to the importance of the concept of Australian citizenship in building an inclusive nation. Australian citizenship is the most unifying force in our diverse nation. It represents the offer to migrants and their acceptance of full and equal partnership in Australian society. Australian citizenship unites all Australians. It unites all of us by fostering a shared identity, a common commitment to the principles of parliamentary democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality before the law, and English as our national language. On Australia Day this year, around 13,500 from 144 countries became Australian citizens. Indeed, there will be 120,000 new Australian citizens by grant, people who have migrated here and are settling in Australia. There will be 120,000 new Australian citizens this year. Moving now to talk about how my department contributes to national security through border management. And of course, while we are closely involved in social policy, we also play a part in managing Australia's border and contribute to meeting many of the key challenges facing us in that regard. While border security is an important part of our work, we weren't originally established as a national security agency. Traditionally, that role belongs to a range of agencies including ASIO, the Australian Federal Police and the Department of Defence. Nor does my department have responsibility for settling the national security agenda. But we are very much part now of the national security community. This is reflected quite importantly through our ministers and my inclusion in the National Security Committee of Cabinet, along with, of course, other ministers, including the Prime Minister, the Minister for Defence, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Treasurer and the Attorney-General. Our membership of the national security community enables DIAC to tap into the expertise of other border protection and security agencies to deliver a balanced whole-of-government approach to border management. Important partnerships and collaborations underpin this border management arrangement. We work closely with other federal agencies such as Customs and Border Protection, Quarantine, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, the Australian Federal Police, the list goes on, to ensure that all stakeholders fully participate in and contribute to the smooth operation of Australia's border and indeed look to ongoing enhancements in border management. In fact, on any given day, thousands of immigration, customs and quarantine staff work at Australia's borders and contribute to managing them in many ways. This, of course, is highlighted through the television program Border Security, which last week had 1.2 million viewers, making it the fourth highest program on Australian television, and just a wonderful showcasing of the work that happens around the clock, around Australia, every day of the year. We also work very closely with the aviation and maritime sectors, including with industry bodies, individual companies and private suppliers of technology. For example, many years ago when Australia was beginning to develop its Advanced Passenger Processing Program, or APP, it engaged Qantas to be a partner in the trial. This relationship has continued well past implementing APP. Most recently, Qantas crew trialled an automated passenger clearance process known as SmartGate using an Australian biometric passport. This approach also extends to regional and international engagement. For example, through joint participation in international fora such as APEC and the International Air Transport Association Control Authorities Working Group. In the past, governments may have relied upon their own intelligence information, but today we think of regional and global security and we share information. One example of this is the Regional Movement Alert System. RMAS is an initiative of the APEC Business Mobility Group, which is chaired by my department. It's a world first in the real-time verification of passport data in a multilateral environment. In other words, RMAS enables Australia, New Zealand and the US to detect the attempted use of lost, stolen and valid passports real time when someone's actually trying to check in at an airline counter using those documents. We continue to work with other APEC economies as they consider becoming part of the RMAS scheme. As we create partnerships with our international counterparts and explore common areas of concern, we find that the need for international cooperation is in fact increasing. In the future, the continued effectiveness of our border security will rely heavily on the strength of our international collaboration. Further benefits that can be gained by working with multiple agencies and partners are demonstrated through our layered approach to border management. The decision made long ago to adopt the universal visa requirement for Australia and later to develop a range of electronic visa systems rather than simply adopting visa waiver programs provides Australia with a screening mechanism which prevents people identified as posing a security, criminal or health risk travelling to and entering the country. It also provides a platform which to build this layered approach to border management. The first layer in our virtual border begins with a person making a visa application. The act of applying for a visa allows an examination of the person, their intent, their previous travel history and whether or not they may pose a risk to the Australian community. The process for granting a visa to a person relies on intelligence on immigration malpractices that we identify, as well as collaboration with a range of other government departments, border and national security agencies. Through this whole of government approach, the department places a high degree of focus on pre-clearance of travellers, checking an individual's bona fides, identity, intent and any character or security issues long before they're granted authority to travel. In return, this provides visa holders with greater certainty that they will in fact be allowed to enter Australia when they reach our physical border. Visa and pre-clearance in most cases ensures that more efficient and faster clearance when travellers arrive in Australia, where Immigration and Customs jointly work to facilitate processing genuine travellers very quickly and to spend significant resources on detecting and preventing unauthorised entry. My department has representation in a large number of countries overseas, facilitating our work ahead of the physical border. In essence, our border controls and facilitation measures commence long before a person arrives at the physical border. Our offshore capability includes liaison, integrity and intelligence specialist officers. We also work jointly with regional partners and like-minded countries around the world. For example, we have a network of airline liaison officers at key international airports overseas, supporting airlines operating flights to Australia. Some of you may well have noticed as you're boarding an aircraft to Australia in Bangkok or Singapore or Dubai or Hong Kong or a number of other airports that actually at the point of entering the aircraft there's a face-to-passport examination, and quite often you'll notice that there's an Australian there doing it, not simply a security officer employed by the airline. That's one of my staff. We have 30 or so officers deployed at ports of entry to Australia undertaking that actual check, not only ensuring that we're picking up people who may be using false passports or other documents, but also facilitating the travel of people who may have inadvertently forgotten to go about applying for a visa. Most often these officers are actually helping people to travel, but importantly they're stopping people from travelling as well. The advanced passenger processing system that I mentioned earlier is integrated with airline flight management systems operating at check-in overseas. It provides definitive instructions to airline staff concerning a passenger's authority to travel to Australia, and it's backed up by a comprehensive infringement regime. We have a targeting support unit also working with customs to detect persons of interest if they're actually en route to Australia. In addition to APP, the department also used risk profiling capabilities and continuous checking against the alert list for new information, as well as tools to harness airline information. On arrival in Australia, immigration clearance and referral processing at airports and seaports takes place these days largely through SmartGate, which operates under the provisions of the Migration Act. The Central Movement Alert System, usually referred to as CMAL, is an integral piece of this layered approach. It's a database containing person and document alerts in relation to health, character and national security matters. The system is checked at numerous parts of the traveller's pathway, including document alert lists at APP and full person and document alert checks en route to Australia. Any person identified en route can have a recommended referral, including in the CMAL record, for the attention of the primary line officer at the border on arrival in Australia. And of course, through this process, we work very closely with ASIO to resolve any issues of potential national security matters. The layered approach to our borders will improve and strengthen over time, with the continued cooperation and collaboration through our established partnerships. Globally, millions of people are leaving their countries of origin due to factors such as civil conflict, economic disadvantage and social conditions. The vast majority reach their first destination point, which is relatively safe in comparison to their home country, and settle there. For example, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reported that, at the end of 2010, there were 15.4 million refugees and nearly 900,000 asylum seekers globally. Of these, Pakistan hosts 1.9 million refugees and Iran hosts around 1.7 million refugees. Only a very small proportion engage the people of the services of people smugglers to move to secondary or subsequent destination points, and an altogether smaller number actually move on to come to Australia. According to the UNHCR, the Asia-Pacific region hosts some 3.8 million refugees and asylum seekers. Malaysia alone hosts 100,000 asylum seekers and refugees, compared with around 4,000 people in Indonesia and 106,000 in Thailand. In the Australian context, of course, we've seen around 15,000 irregular maritime arrivals arrive since July 2008, and we also see a significant number of people who've come via air, having obtained a visa, seek refugee status in Australia as well. Of course, tragically, hundreds of people have died seeking to come to Australia on boat journeys during that time. As co-chair of the Bali process on people smuggling, trafficking in persons and related transnational crime, the shorthand is the Bali process, Australia has worked closely with Indonesia and member states to effectively raise regional awareness of the consequences of people smuggling and in developing strategies and practical cooperation in response. On 30 March 2011, ministers at the 4th Ministerial Conference agreed to establish a regional cooperation framework. The agreement to establish the framework represented a significant first step by countries in the region and a clear recognition by Bali process members of the need for a cooperative international response to an enduring and complex regional and global challenge. The framework is based on the concept of burden sharing and cooperation between source, transit and destination countries, and encourages countries in the region to improve cooperation by entering into practical bilateral or multilateral arrangements on a voluntary basis. The framework aims to reduce irregular movement through the region, improve protection arrangements, and to increase burden sharing in the management of asylum seekers. Any arrangement under the framework should be guided by a number of considerations, including upholding the need to promote human life and dignity and the principles of burden sharing and collective responsibility. Agreement by Bali process co-chair ministers to establish a regional support office as a key mechanism to operationalise the framework is a recent significant development, and it represents commitment from countries in the region to the ongoing exploration and development of practical measures to address complex irregular migration issues. The transfer and resettlement arrangement between the governments of Australia and Malaysia, augmented by an assessment centre in Papua New Guinea, were to be practical bilateral initiatives under the framework. These initiatives represent proactive and genuine progress in regional cooperation and a significant advance in the management of irregular migration and combating people smuggling. However, they of course have not been implemented as a result of the High Court decision in August 2011, which made offshore processing as we currently know it, under the laws passed in 2001, practically impossible. The arrangements and initiatives that have been proposed and developed since March last year, when the RCF was first established, are a reflection of sustained diplomatic activity for the government and our partners in the region. We will continue to closely engage with key regional partners, UNHCR, the International Organisation for Migration and other Bali process members to operationalise both bilateral and multilateral components of the RCF, consistent with Australian law and with the framework's core principles. If I could just move now to quickly talk about some areas of international capacity building. Another way in which my department strengthens Australia's borders and contributes to national security at both domestic and international levels is by building the capacity of countries in the region or in regions of high risk such as the Middle East to manage their borders more effectively. In the Asia-Pacific region, our activities are aimed at developing immigration control and related law enforcement agencies' capabilities in document fraud protection, facial image comparison, fraud investigation and intelligence analysis. These programs help build our neighbours' capacity to detect and prevent the irregular movement of people across and within borders. They also build positive engagement at operational and more senior levels to increase my department's and Australia's capacity to influence those countries. For example, the department has had a visiting immigration intelligence training team working with East Timorese immigration officers since 2003 to improve their understanding of their own borders. In 2007, while on a training visit, some of the East Timorese the team was working with uncovered a people trafficking operation. The subsequent action that was taken on their findings prevented several hundred women being sold into sexual servitude in the Middle East. While such a find was valuable for the East Timorese and of course enormously important for the people concerned, there were some real benefits for Australia as well. This included the identification of a transnational crime syndicate working close to Australia and the fostering of a real sense of partnership with East Timor in preventing transnational crime in the region. Our work in the area of national security is very much aligned with the Strategic Border Management Plan and the Government's National Security Statement. In particular, we've been working to fuse national and international capabilities in the priority areas of managing the identity and intent of travellers, intelligence and information sharing, and unauthorised or irregular movements of people, particularly by air. New technologies, such as the development of biometric technologies, is providing opportunities to enhance our systems in order to better establish people's identities. Whilst Australia is not a so-called leader in this area, this way forward is seen as a priority by the government, and we're keen to exploit the advantages of international collaboration and cooperation. We're phasing in the use of biometrics in a risk-based stage approach to improve the identity management of offshore visa applicants wishing to travel to Australia. This is being achieved in partnership with the United Kingdom's Border Agency by utilising their existing network of visa application centres to collect biometric data from visa applicants. The first stage of the program extends to visa applications lodged in 16 countries, managed by 10 of our officers across Africa, Asia, Europe and the Middle East. Under the new arrangements, all people, regardless of nationality, who lodge paper-based applications for visas in the selected countries will be required to have their photographs taken and to provide fingerprints as part of their visa application. Again, emphasis has been placed on working with overseas border agencies in the collection and sharing of biometric data, particularly through forums such as the 5-Country Conference, involving Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Canada and the United States. Under the 5-country arrangements, fingerprints are checked across the member countries, with biographic and other selected information only exchanged in the event of a match. Information shared is supplied in accordance with the immigration and privacy laws of the country providing the information, as well as legal arrangements signed by all of the countries. We've had some notable successes in identifying individuals who were not who they claimed to be, or whose history indicated they were known to other border agencies. To cite one such example, the fingerprints of a person claiming asylum in Britain matched a fingerprint collected in the United States, where he'd previously travelled on an Australian passport. The client was identified as an Australian citizen who was wanted in Australia to face sexual assault charges. Through these arrangements, he was identified and able to be brought back to Australia, where he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. This case highlights the potential for international biometric checking and sharing data matches to detect individuals with criminal records or evading law enforcement. The use of biometric data in passports has also broadened the ability to process some travellers. I mentioned earlier the smart gate system involving automatic gates which utilise biometrics, which have now been introduced at several Australian airports. These provide faster processing with increased security, matching the biometric data with the travellers in question. The Australian Government is also looking towards the next generation of border security. Following the launch of the Government's National Security Statement in 2008, a comprehensive package of measures designed to strengthen Australia's international and domestic aviation security regime was announced in February 2010. Over 4 years, $200 million will be invested on new and improved security technologies, increasing policing at airports and enhanced security procedures. All of this will occur in the context of strengthened international cooperation. My department is implementing several of these measures, including the biometrics initiative with the United Kingdom that I've mentioned. Another of them, which is being jointly implemented by DIAC and ASIO, is the Next Generation Border Security Initiative. This initiative will use advanced data analysis and risk profiling to better identify visa applicants who may represent national security risks, enabling my department to refer sub-applicants to ASIO for assessment. It is a first step in employing modern analytics technology to help identify more sophisticated ways of working out which individuals may present a risk among the many tens of thousands of visa applicants that we consider each week. The initial focus will be on national security risk. However, over time, next generation border security will be capable of extension to identify some other forms of risk. By itself, it's a relatively small project, but it builds on all of the previous work of my department and our partner agencies that we've done to develop the layered approach to border management. Beyond the next generation border security, the department expects to add further risk identification tools to detect risks amongst visa applicants and travellers. This includes capabilities like network analysis to detect when new clients have links to previous problem cases or to organisers, and text analysis to analyse the free text fields in our visa applications. We also expect to continually improve our connectivity to other border, intelligence and law enforcement agencies so that the value of the information we collect from visa applicants and travellers can be fully leveraged to Australia's benefit. A key focus in our delivery of these programs and policies that contribute to national security is operational integrity. A key role of the department, as set out in our 2011-12 strategic plan, is to support the integrity of our programs through high levels of compliance with Australia's migration and citizenship laws. We have a dedicated risk, fraud and integrity division, and we've established a specific position, a global manager for operational integrity, to provide integrity support to the visa and citizenship programs within our onshore and offshore service delivery network. The global manager brings together a range of integrity-related business units to promote nationally and globally consistent business practices and a responsible and flexible workforce able to deal with emerging integrity issues. This includes onshore referral mechanisms for decision makers across a range of visa programs, information collection units to receive, record and disseminate information received from community sources, the Migration Integrity Officer Network, the Student Integrity Network, operational and integrity reporting to support visa processing officers, and operational integrity training and capability development. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, my department plays a key role in the government's domestic and international national security agenda. We believe that we've been an innovator in the creation of strong and effective border controls over the last 67 years. Decisions made with the primary purpose of protecting the integrity of the migration program have all stood the test of recent events well. They provided the solid base on which to incorporate new approaches, some of which I've outlined for you here today. We'll continue our work with our international partners, government and industry to ensure that we continue to balance the twin challenges of facilitation and enhanced national security well into the future. Thank you for coming along today and for listening to this address, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you might have. So, thank you. Okay, and I'll act as my own compere, so if there are any questions, then please put up your hand and I'll attempt to handle them. So, yeah.
I've heard a number cited of illegal residents of about 60,000 or so. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Is that a security concern for you?
The number has been around 50, high 50s for some time now. It needs to be seen in perspective that proportionate to the Australian population, it's a very small number of people. It represents well less than 1% of the Australian population. By comparison, the number of undocumented or illegal residents in the United States of America is somewhere between 10 and 12 million. They don't really know how many, which represents something around 3% of their population. I don't think it represents a security risk per se. Of course, people who overstay visas and fail to return home are in breach of Australian law and are subject to the potential for detention and removal, and a large number of people are removed from Australia each year. But I wouldn't classify it as a security risk per se. The largest number of overstayers come from countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, where those are the countries where we have large numbers of tourists as well. So.
John Goss, I'm an economist, so I think in terms of economic incentives a bit. What would happen if Indonesia and Malaysia were given a performance bonus of several $100 million a year, which varied in proportion to the number of irregular arrivals?
An interesting concept coming from an economist. I employ a few economists and I value them greatly. No, seriously, we do. They actually bring a great deal of rigour to what we do. I think that this is an incredibly complex issue. You know, the sorts of scale of numbers that I mentioned before just show you that irregular travel, for a whole range of reasons, whether it's simply seeking work, whether it's fleeing persecution, whether it is because of crop reduction, impact of changing weather patterns. There are a multitude of reasons why people move. Australia is in a fairly unique position of being a country occupying a continent and having probably, if not the most sophisticated border management arrangements in the world, close to it. I would argue that we probably have the most sophisticated arrangements. Few other countries, for example, actually know who comes into the country and who leaves the country, whereas we've got a very good idea about that. The scale of the issue that we're facing in terms of the reasons for people moving, whether it's because of conflict, persecution, or looking for a better life for economic or other reasons, together with the porous nature of borders, the ubiquitous nature of modern air transport, makes the job of border management authorities very difficult. And so while I'm sure people would always happily accept further funding, and we certainly do provide a lot of funding in terms of capacity building that I outlined in the speech, the challenge is significant because we are talking about porous borders and a whole range of other issues that go to making this a pretty complex problem. So yeah.
I'm the media student, but I also do national security as a minor
Yep.
here. Back with the Malaysia deal,
Yeah.
And how it's been removed and it's no longer possible. Hypothetically, if Australia were to set up its own public facility, just like Nauru, could the High Court overrule its own judgment to allow us to set up our own private facility if Malaysia allowed us to?
We don't believe so unless the laws that the High Court has interpreted themselves are changed. The High Court has effectively interpreted legislation passed in the wake of the Tampa incident in 2001, requiring certain adherence to international conventions or similar requirements in domestic law of any country that Australia may wish to make arrangements. And our analysis, backed up by legal analysis, is that there are very, very few countries in this region that would be able to pass the test set by the High Court. New Zealand is one country, but there are very few other countries that would be able to pass that test. And we believe that for practical reasons, even Nauru would not be able to put itself in that situation without some very significant changes occurring. So for that reason, the advice from the department, which the government has made public, is that there would need to be a change in Australian law in the underlying legislation to enable the Malaysia arrangement or similar offshore processing arrangements to continue in the future. And the position of the government is that the executive government of the day should have flexibility to adopt policies and arrangements in this regard, and it needs the legislative flexibility in order to do that, and that certainly doesn't exist since the High Court case. So, sorry, just a supplementary. So,
Has New Caledonia ever been considered as part of the French?
I'll be very careful what I say, because I know that there are people here who may well report what I'm saying, but I can say that we have we have looked at every possible opportunity, but I'm not going to rule in or rule out particular places, but certainly within the web of our immigration relationships, our foreign affairs relationships, we of course have looked, and as a result of that, we actually believe that the Malaysia arrangement represented a very effective way of removing the incentive for people to travel in an irregular manner. It did provide people with the pathway to and the guarantees required under the Refugees Convention, and importantly it removed the incentive for people to use people smugglers, and it's with profound regret that I read every time of another tragedy of people drowning, because frankly there should be better ways to manage our borders than to have people spend $10,000 or $15,000 paying a people smuggler to travel, and quite often that ending up in their death. So hello.
Mr. Metcalfe, I'm one of the people who will like the report on historic person from the Australian
Yeah,
newspaper.
g'day.
Just on what you said in your speech about the impact of the High Court decision on parliament process framework.
Yep.
Is it your view that the High Court's decision and the stalemate within Parliament at the moment is undermining Australia's ability to be a regional leader in this issue?
No, I certainly wouldn't say that. I think Australia remains a very strong regional partner. We have worked very collaboratively with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with a whole range of other countries, Singapore, Thailand. I mentioned in my speech the fact that notwithstanding the High Court decision and the view the Court has taken in relation to the 2001 laws, that we continue to look for practical measures, and there is a great deal of practical work that is underway. The Regional Support Office, for example, that's being established in Bangkok, will continue to grow capability and strength in this area. So I wouldn't say that it's undermined our ability to be a leader. We work very closely and continue to try and assist and work as a partner, but it certainly has been a major setback in terms of the common understanding about the ability to use offshore processing as a tool to remove the incentive for irregular travel. So yeah, John. So.
Charlie Halligan, Anti-Institute for Governance. Is there an expectation of your department that you should be responsible for increasing social cohesion, either by yourself or in conjunction with other agencies? And similarly with Citizenship, do you have a responsibility, given the emphasis you placed on its significance, do you have a responsibility, or is there an expectation that you should try and increase the proportion of residents who are citizens?
Yeah, the answer to both questions is yes. We do have responsibility for cultural diversity policy, and of course that has been emphasised over the last year or so by a major statement on multicultural policy from Minister Bowen, the establishment of the Australian Multicultural Council, of which I'm a member ex officio, together with the Human Rights Commissioner, the Race Discrimination Commissioner, chaired by Judge Ralph Sulio from South Australia, and of course only a week or so ago Senator Lundy became Minister for Multicultural Affairs. So I think that there is a clear and largely uncontested view that the reality is that Australia is a culturally diverse, multicultural nation. As I've said, 1 in 2 of us have got an experience in this country that only goes back 1 generation. We're a country that also is home to the world's oldest Indigenous populations, and so through that extraordinary diversity of culture of people who've come from all around the globe, particularly since the end of World War II, and particularly since the abolition of the White Australia policy, we've got an extraordinary country. I believe that Australian citizenship, the genius of the inclusive nature of Australian citizenship that was displayed by our parliamentarians in the late 40s, knowing that Australia would be bringing people here from countries other than the United Kingdom, meant that there was a sense that there would be a common status for us all, whether we were born here or whether we've migrated from elsewhere. And that's where I believe Australian multiculturalism differs from the so-called European experiment with multiculturalism that's been the subject of critical remarks by Chancellor Merkel and by Prime Minister Cameron about a year ago. And I note that Mr Bowen spoke extensively about this back then. But Australian citizenship is a extraordinary uniting force, shared rights and responsibilities, and I think it's a very precious thing, and it's something that actually makes the modern Australian nature the cohesive success that we are. So up the back. So.
Do you see a day when it will be mandatory for Australian citizens to use SmartGate? And in relation to that 5-country partnership, the countries that have reciprocal rights, reciprocal arrangements with Australia, that they will be able to use a similar type of system?
Yeah. Look, I'd probably defer to my colleague Michael Carmody, because the actual implementation of SmartGate sits with Customs and Immigration, and passports are in support of that. But I just note that it's usually better to encourage people to do things than to force them to do things, and there are always going to be exceptions to the rule. People who may not be comfortable with the technology may have an objection to the method of collection of the biometric, which is using facial geometry rather than an iris scan, for example. So I'd be surprised if there is a 100% SmartGate. I suspect there'll always be the lane off to the side where you go through the old process. It just may be that there's a much longer queue over there, and that you're encouraged to use the SmartGate process. I was in Wellington, New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting to see how New Zealand are really encouraging the use of SmartGate by having people there as custodians saying, have you thought about SmartGate, come over here, and it's very easy, and just educating people into how. And in the same way that my mum refuses to use an automatic teller machine, but most of us, it's ubiquitous, I suspect, in 10 or 15 years' time, we'll just use SmartGate. And you can see how simple and pervasive it is if you're privileged enough to stand at the security point on the border between Singapore and Malaysia at Johor Bahru at Woodlands border crossing, where 5-year-old kids who live in Malaysia come to school in Singapore every day, and who simply walk up with a passport, put their fingerprint down, and walk through the border. So 5-year-olds can do it. Hopefully 52-year-olds will learn to do it as well. So yeah. So. I think there's always the potential for that, and that's where we constantly work with the media to try and ensure that there's balanced information and reporting. We have quite a significant national communications branch. We have a spokesperson who, working closely with the Minister's office, is available for comment on these issues. I do believe there's been a more sophisticated discussion and debate over the last 2 or 3 years. The comments of key international figures and the recent visit of the United Nations High Commissioner, Antonio Guterres, for example, which puts things in a bit of global perspective, is important. And we continue to encourage the media to report in a balanced way and to ensure that we keep things in perspective. It certainly is a significant issue. Certainly we believe that any system of entry to the country where there is a substantial risk of death is not a good public policy approach to take, and therefore we believe that finding pathways for people who do have a protection need, but in a way that preserves the safety of human life and dignity is very important. So within all of that context, I have used opening statements to Senate estimates committees and other committees to try and put some of these facts on the record, and I do believe that generally there is a more serious and better informed understanding, and to the extent to which the media assists with that, then that's a good thing. So. Yes, mate.
David Ellery, Canberra Times. Christmas Island, is it more trouble than it's worth? Shouldn't give it back to you.
Good try, David. So, look, Christmas Island is very much part of Australia. It has a very significant facility. The government many years ago decided that it would base immigration processing for irregular maritime arrivals at Christmas Island, largely recognising that many of them come here, and if you're advancing the theory of, well, if it wasn't there, they wouldn't come, I suspect that there's enough reasons to come, they just come elsewhere. And of course, some people come to Ashmore Reef, and if you go back 10 or 20 years, we've seen arrivals on the east coast of Australia, on the northwest coast of Australia, in Darwin. So, people will come, and Australia is a terrific place, and people always want to come. The question is whether there are alternative approaches, and that's where we thought the Malaysia arrangement was very effective. Christmas Island with its large and very significant, it was a $400 million investment eventually to build the detention centre on Christmas Island, is now being used in a quite different way to what it might have been used a couple of years ago. The fact that we now have a significant number of people in community detention who are not in detention facilities at all, a significant number of people now being granted bridging visas and moving into the community on bridging visas, together with the completion of building works in a whole range of places in Australia, Inverbrackie, Wickham Point up near Darwin, and so on, means that Christmas Island is largely being used as an initial reception centre where people are brought, given health checking, identity checking, initial security checking, and then moved to the mainland quite quickly. Christmas Island, however, also represents the most modern purpose-built immigration detention centre, and it's also therefore used as part of our overall arrangements. Some of our clients can be quite challenging and represent a security risk, not in a national security viewpoint, but from a physical security viewpoint, and so it does have some capability to manage in a more stable way people who may not be able to be managed properly in a temporary facility. So its use has actually changed quite significantly in the last 6 months or so. Yeah.
Just following up on that question, because you mentioned Ashmore Reef and Christmas Island. Two-part question, I suppose. Does anybody, do any asylum seekers fetch up on overseas islands, and does that factor into Australia's border protection?
Yeah. We haven't seen from memory anyone arrive at Cocos Keeling for some time, but we have in the past, and there's absolutely no reason to think, well, you wouldn't again in the future. It's part of Australia. We have had some vessels come directly from Sri Lanka to Australia without people moving through the Southeast Asian countries, and it, of course, if you draw a line on a map, Caucasus is on the way. So look, that's there in our operational planning. Should there be an arrival there, the plan is to quite quickly move people to the better facilities that we have on Christmas Island. So thank you, and I think we've now possibly run out of time. So
well, yes, we have.
Yeah. So
not run out of time so much that we can't say thank you. On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, can I thank you for coming to the university today, and can I thank you for the way you've delivered the pitch from immigration and the way you've answered the questions. What struck me was the real importance of citizenship in all of this. You said there towards the end in one of the answers, Australia's a terrific place, and I think it is, and I for one actually think it's a good thing that people want to come here.
Yep.
But I also think it's a wonderful thing that you and your department make it such a wonderful place for the inclusion methods and resilience and all those other things that we probably don't think about all the time as one of those components of national security. So you've answered the question today in your brief and the way you've delivered the address. You have an enormous role in national security, not just the immediate sense, but that longer term sense of making Australia a terrific place. So thank you for the delivery, thank you for the way that you've answered the questions, and can I also express that I think we know you're going off on a few holidays.
Yep.
In fact, I think you said as you came in, the kids are gone, the cars
For
are
a
booked, and the chateau is booked in France. After 7 years in this job, you deserve a rest. Congratulations on what you've achieved. Have a great break, and we look forward to, when you come back, to your continuing role as a leader in the public service.
Thanks very much.
So thank you very much. There's two other announcements, maybe three. Can I thank the Politics, International Relations, National Security Piranhas for your first outing, for coming along today. Can I also advertise that the next in the National Security Lecture Series will be in this location at the same time on Friday the 30th of March. And the person to address this will be His Excellency Paul Matten, the High Commissioner from the United Kingdom. I've asked Paul to speak on the British approach to national security. I've asked him to talk a little bit about their approach to the upcoming Olympic Games and how they might deal with that in a security sense. But I've also asked him to give a British view on the Asia Pacific. Britain is paying more attention to what's happening out here, and they will clearly have a different view from ours, and I think it might be useful. So the 30th of March, this place at 12:30 for His Excellency Paul Matten. And the final thing is to invite the Piranhas and any other UC students, if you'd like to come down. Andrew has said that he'd be delighted to stay behind. I don't think he said delighted. He said he'd stay behind and is very happy to talk to you about your studies and perhaps your job prospects in the future and any other issues that you might like to talk about. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you on the 30th of March.